Okay, in this lecture I'm going to discuss manipulating HTML elements from JavaScript. So let's open a terminal. I keep my development work in my dev folder. Okay, so there's my files. Whenever you're developing something, you can copy from an existing file that you have. If you know that file works, just keep in mind if that file is broken and you use it as a template, then your next file is going to be broken too. Alright, so it's a little risky, but it can also save you a lot of headaches. So we'll copy Intro to CSS into a new document. So this lecture is about JavaScript manipulating HTML elements. So that's a long title, but that'll work. Manipulating HTML with JS.html. Okay. Type ls. See it's in there. I'm going to use Atom, the Atom editor. Okay. So I'm going to start from scratch, but I just wanted to let you know that sometimes it is useful to start from an existing file and then make changes to it. It can be very helpful. But like I said, if that file has a bug in it or something's not quite right, your next file will also have that same bug, so be cautious of that. Okay, so we're going to start manipulating some HTML elements. So let's start with our doc type tag. We've got an HTML tag. Inside the HTML tag we have a head tag and a body tag. Okay, inside the head tag we have a title. Okay, and we're going to have an h1 tag, okay, so that's the basic start. I've been copying over everything to the CS server and running it there. If you only have one document that you're loading as your web page, like we're just using one HTML file, you can just run it locally from Chrome. So if you just double click on it, whatever browser you have configured to be your default will generally open that file. And this way we don't have to copy it over every single time. We can just work on it locally, and then when it's all finished, then we can copy it over to the CS server. So that'll be a little bit nicer for us. It's important that you make your workflow easy as possible. If there's a whole lot of steps in your workflow, then it becomes difficult and tedious, and you won't do it. So we're going to make this really easy on ourselves. And then, once we get done with this page, then we just copy it over the one time. Right? It's important to know that computer scientists are lazy, and that's a very good thing. It's also a bad thing. But it's good because they write programs to simplify menial tasks, right? Because they're lazy, they don't like doing things. So they'll write a program to do it. So it's good and bad. Alright, so here's our page, manipulating HTML elements with JavaScript. Alright, so previously we learned about the box model and some CSS, and we can use JavaScript to help us manipulate the output of a page. So these elements on here, we can change the color, we can change any of the CSS, we can change the content. So I'm going to show you how to do some of that stuff. So let's go ahead and add a style tag. Okay, so this is referencing the body tag. So I'm going to change the background color of the entire body tag. And then let's make a class my heading, and make the color of that red. I'll add that class in here. Alright, so there we go. Starting out good. So let's make another heading. Okay, now notice I can just refresh the page since it's locally and it's only one file. If your website's multiple files, this doesn't usually work, but since it's just the one HTML file, it will. And then we can just refresh every time we make changes in here. Alright, so we have these two elements and we want to do something interesting with them. So we'll like change the color or something here. So we'll add a button. And we're going to put some text on that button. It says click me. Alright, save it, refresh. We got a button, it doesn't do anything. Okay. So buttons are an example of an event-based architecture. So basically the program doesn't do anything until there's a certain event that happens. In this case, the event is the user clicks something. So the program does nothing, it's just sitting there waiting for an event to happen. And there's all sorts of different events. Mouse movement is an event. There's an incredible number of events, and you can, off of any of those events in JavaScript, you can execute code. So that's kind of the entry point into a program. Is with web development especially, it's event-based, and so the entry points are usually user events, but you can have other events as well. Okay, so the user event we're going to reference here is a click. So on click, we need to do something. So we need to execute a JavaScript function. Alright, so we'll call that function clicker. Alright, now we haven't defined this function yet. So at the very bottom of your body tag is where you always put your JavaScript. So we make our script tag and we close it. Alright, now inside of here, everything inside here is JavaScript. This is a JavaScript comment. Okay. So 2 slashes, this entire line is a comment and won't be executed as part of the program. but the comments are useful for you when the program gets big to understand what's going on. You don't want to overdo comments. You can definitely have too much going on with the comments, but they are very helpful at times. If you have too many comments, when you update the code, then you forget to update the comments, and then the comments don't match the code, and it can become a problem. So just be careful about how much you comment, but it's like anything else, it's meant to be a tool for you. So use it however works for your workflow. Alright, so we're in JavaScript and we need to make this clicker function. To define a function, we start with the function keyword. Function. Alright, then what's the name of the function? The name of the function is clicker. And as part of defining the function, we have to add a left and right parentheses. Okay. Then the body of the function is contained in curly braces. Okay, left curly brace and right curly brace. And then we put the content of what this function is supposed to do inside those curly braces. And we indent code so visually we can see. And we can add comments in here. So like code goes here. Alright, see it's all indented. Visually when we look at this, we know all this stuff is part of the clicker function because it's indented. If it wasn't indented, it would get messy and it would be hard to read. Okay. So clicker. We want this to do something interesting with our HTML elements. So first we have to get those HTML elements. So we're going to create a variable in JavaScript, and to do that use the keyword var, and we're going to name this element1. So that's the name of our variable, and we're going to set that equal to, we're going to retrieve an HTML element. So we need an ID for this. So we'll call this item 1. And we'll go ahead and put an ID on this other one because we'll need that too. This is item 2. Okay. So we're going to pull down this element using built-in features of the browser. We'll go into this later, but for now, just to grab an element, you need to know it's document.get element by ID. And this is a function. We're calling a function. You can tell it's a function because of the left and right parentheses. That's how you call a function. Notice up here, when you click, when we have the click event, we're calling a function. Calling a function means execute the code inside that function. Okay, so left and right parentheses, and inside we're going to provide this function with an argument, or a parameter, it's sometimes called. So the argument is the ID of the element we want it to find. Okay, so we surround item 1 by quotes. Things that are surrounded by quotes in computer science are generally referred to as strings. In JavaScript, this is a string. It's a string of characters. Okay, and that gets into how the computer stores this type of information, which we will get into later. If I didn't have the quotes, this would be a variable, and I'd be passing in whatever was stored in the variable. That's not what we want. We want a string. Okay, so element 1, get element by ID, and that ID is item 1. Okay, so a good way to start one of your debugging tools to find problems to help you figure out what's going on in your code is a console.log. And if you open your developer tools over here, and I'm using Google Chrome, you go to the settings, more tools, developer tools, or there's this shortcut. over here there's a console, and you can output things to this console, or you can interact with JavaScript directly. Okay, so I can log a message to that console to make sure clicker is being run. Okay, so this is going to say you clicked clicker. I reload the page and I click it. You clicked clicker. Okay, so that's good. So I know when I press this button, this function's actually being called, which is good. That's helpful to know that we're at least making it this far in our code. Alright, now I'm going to see if I actually got the element that I think I did. So I'm going to log. Now this time I'm logging the contents of this variable. Notice there are no quotes. Okay, so I'm just going to log whatever this variable is storing, and it should be the HTML element. Yep, there it is. See, and when I hover over it, it highlights it. Okay, so that's good. We're right where we thought we were. So I can do something interesting like change the color of this, for example. Okay, so I can type element1 dot style. So I'm going to change the style, which is also the CSS, and I'll change color, and I'll set that equal to blue. Okay. Then I'll grab the other element, copy that. This is element 2. Document dot get element by ID. The ID is item 2 because it matches the ID up here. And we'll say we want to make this one green. Okay, so let's reload the page. Click me. Element 2. Oops, I'm going to change this. Okay, this is a common mistake in programming where one little character change dramatically impacts what's supposed to happen. I was expecting element 1 to turn blue and element 2 to turn green. Instead, element 2 was green. As this code executed, element 1 style.color was turned to blue, but then so quickly, since I didn't put element 2 here, so quickly, it was quicker than I could perceive with my human eye, the computer calculated this next instruction, or executed it, and element 1, the style color, was changed to green. So it went from blue to green, but it's so fast you can't even tell. It just looks like it went to green because the computers execute so quickly. So this is a very common mistake where you have one character difference and the program behaves wildly different. That's why it's very important that you pay attention to naming. Don't get careless with your naming, and that's why in the homework assignments and some of the labs you have to name things exactly correct, or you don't get credit, because that's a big part of computer science. Alright, so we've fixed this. This is element 2. Reload. There you go. So this is blue. This first element turned blue, and the second element is green. That's kind of a rough blue. Let's do a 2, 5, let's see. Oops. Yeah, needs to be lighter. 4, 5. There we go. That's nice. Alright, so that's a good start. Let's add another element. Let's add a counter. So we'll call this one counter, and counter starts 0. Okay, so refresh the page and click our button. Let's add another button to increment the counter. Okay, so we'll say increment counter, and then we're going to make a new JavaScript function called increment counter. Alright, so we reload. Click me still works. If I click increment counter, I have not defined that function yet, so I should get an error in the console. Okay, uncaught reference error. This is important. It tells you when you see red, those are error messages in the console, and it gives you clues as to what the problem is in your code. Okay, so this says increment counter is not defined. Okay, and it says it needs it to be defined on the HTML button element on its onClick attribute. So sure enough, when I look on this button's onClick, it's calling this function and that doesn't exist. Okay, so the solution is to go back into our JavaScript, which is right here, and we make a new function. So here's our clicker function. Just go underneath of it and go function. That's how you define a function, with the function keyword, and increment counter. Alright. Left and right parentheses, curly brackets. So after every line in JavaScript, or most lines in JavaScript, you need a semicolon. Okay, there are a few exceptions to that. In a function definition, you don't need a semicolon at the end here, but you can store functions and variables, and if you do it that way, then you do need a semicolon. So it's a little confusing. So we'll just stick to the one way of defining functions for now, so that way you remember whether or not you have to use a semicolon. So when you define a function this way, the function keyword first, you do not need a semicolon at the end of the function definition. Alright, so let's grab, well, first let's just make sure increment counter is working by doing a console.log. Okay, we're going to log this string. It's inside the quotes. So whatever's inside the quotes is going to be exactly output to the terminal. Alright, so we want to say increment counter was clicked. Reload. Increment counter. There we go. It was clicked. So that's working. Now let's go. Let's grab the element. So we create a variable. This is going to be our counter element, and that's going to be document.get element by ID. And we want to grab this element. Okay, and if you right click on it and go to inspect, you can see this is the element that our ID is counter. Okay, as you move through these elements in the development tools, it highlights them, so that could be helpful figuring out what's going on. So clicking on this element, ID counter, so that's what we want. So we want to get the element by the ID, and the ID is counter. Okay, console.log, make sure we have it. Refresh, go back over to console and click increment. Yep, there it is. So that's good. Get rid of that. Now we want to change the content of this counter. Alright, so we're going to add some new text. So we're going to make a variable called new text, and we're going to say the new text of this is Alright, And to start out, we're going to just change the text to that. We're not going to have the counter on the first step. So we use counter element. So this is an HTML element, and there's a built-in function on those, many built-in functions. One of them is, well, this is actually a property, inner text. So we're going to set the inner text equal to this new text that we defined that's in this variable we made called new text. So we've selected the counter element using document.getElementById. So we've got that here in this variable. We access one of its properties, inner text, and we're setting inner text equal to this new text. This new text is stored in this new text variable. Okay. We reload the page. When we hit increment counter, it changed the inside text, which is why it's called inner text. Okay, so now what we want to do is have a counter that when we press that button, it increments the counter. Okay, so to do that, we need a variable. This has to be outside of the function. We have a variable called counter. And we're going to set that equal to 0. Now the reason this has to be outside of the function is if we put it inside, then every single time we click the button, counter would get reset to 0. We don't want that. We want that state to be saved. We're going to change the value of it inside this function. So counter starts at 0. Now we're going to set counter. We're going to change the value of counter to what it was before, plus 1. Okay, so that should increment it by 1. So there's a lot of kind of algebraic math in programming. It's pretty basic, but the concept of variables and then setting variables equal to things. So this variable equals whatever value it had plus 1. And you can do all sorts of mathematical expressions in there. Alright, and so for our new text, let's say counter, and then we're going to add the value of our variable counter. Okay, so this is going to give the exact text counter colon space, and then we're going to add whatever number this variable counter is holding. And when you add a string in JavaScript, when you add a string to a number, it automatically converts it to a string. Okay, so this is going to be, we're concatenating these two strings. So it's basically going to start out like this, counter 0, and every time we hit it, it's going to go up 1. Counter 1, counter 2, counter 3, counter 4. Okay. Alright. So counter plus, and then the value of our counter. And then we set the counter, the new text, we set that to our counter element. Alright, let's save. Press it. Alright, and so you can change that to anything. You can change the counter, instead of incrementing by 1, you can have it increment by a lot. Reload. Okay, so that's basic manipulation of HTML elements with JavaScript. I'm going to keep this page as it is, and then I'm going to make a new page, and we're going to do input-output, because that's going to be common, where you want to get some input from the web page, and then do something interesting with that input, and then output something for the user, right? Do some calculation, collect, their payment information, or whatever it may be. So inputs and outputs are a big part of programming and web development. All right. So let me double check and make sure everything's working. Click me, that worked. That worked. Okay. So we'll save this. Now I need to move that over to my CS. '151 folder, and I need to make a new link here and link to that. Okay, so I'll do that real quick in the terminal. SSH CS 151.0.0 at indstate.edu. Oops, cs.indstate. Dot. Public. So go to Pico index.html. So this is getting pretty common. Hopefully you see these enough where you're starting to get it, starting to sink in. I know it's kind of a lot. There's a lot of code. There's a lot of language artifacts that you've never necessarily seen before. So I'm trying to do this stuff repeatedly so you get it ingrained in your heads. That's a big part of coding. All of these examples you should be trying. You should try to write the code from scratch. The more times you do this, the more intuitive it'll become. Right? That's how the human brain works. It's how we learn very complicated languages as children. You just talk and talk and talk until it's second nature. Okay, so you try all this stuff repeatedly, and it'll become second nature. All right, so here we have lecture 4. Okay, the // means look in the current directory. We have lecture 4 directory inside of that, and then we're going to look for a file called manipulating. Oops, I hit a button there. Manipulating, there it is. HTML with JavaScript. .html. And then the text of the link is manipulating HTML with JavaScript. Okay. And we need to close our li tag. That looks good. Control O saves. Control X. Type ls cat index. Yep, it's there. Refresh the page. There it is. It's a dead link. Now we go back to my dev folder, and I'm going to use the scopy command. What am I copying? That file to my username at cs.indstate.edu, colon, where do I want it? I want it in my home directory under public HTML under lecture 4. Lecture. See if it's there. ls lecture 4. Yep, there it is. Reload the page, click the link. Perfect. Okay, so the next page we're going to be making, go back to a dev folder. I'm going to copy what I just built, manipulating HTML with JS, so the CP command. I'm copying that to input output. Alright, ls, there it is. So let's close this one. Notice an atom, it just popped in there because I created it, so that's really nice. So change the title, input, output. Alright. So let's do, let's get rid of all this. Okay, so we've got h1 tag, class is my heading, and this is input, output. Okay, do an HR tag, horizontal rule, it's just going to add a line underneath, and I'm going to make an H3 tag that says input. Oops. And then I'll add an input. With an ID. Okay, and then I'll add another H3 element. Output. And then this will be we'll make an H4 element. Let's say ID equals output 1. Start out with it saying NA because there's no output to start with. Now let's make a button that says, that does something interesting. Okay. So let's take a look at what we've got so far. I haven't done anything with JavaScript. Everything so far has just been laying out a few HTML elements, nothing complicated. H3 input, I just added IDs to the two elements that we're going to be interacting with from JavaScript. Alright, so I save the file, and since I'm doing it locally, I can just double click on my file and it'll come up in Chrome. Alright, so input output. That's our H1. It's big because it's an H1. It's red because of the class, my heading that I added. Color red. Then we added a horizontal rule, that line. Input, heading, and then this is going to be where we type stuff in. See, this is an input box. And then output. And right now there's no output. And then do something. So this is the button. This is going to start the chain of execution. Okay, so this is event-driven programming. The user clicks the button. That is an event. It is a click event. Alright, so in the JavaScript, let's go down and do something interesting. Alright, so we want the button to do something. So we make a function. Let's see, what do we want it to do? Let's have the output say hello to us. So we're going to make a function called say hello. Okay, left and right parentheses, and then left and right curlies. Alright, say hello. Let's do a console.log, and we can test to make sure this function is getting called when we click the button. So that's always kind of the first thing you want to do to make sure it's working. So okay, now this is a string of characters, and it's surrounded by quotes. Okay, so let's say, what if I want a quotation mark inside of that string? If I just add a quote here, you can see this is now my string and this is something else. So it's not doing what I want it to do. I want that quotation to be a part of the string. Okay, but because you use quotation marks to designate the beginning of a string and an end of a string, you have to do what's called escape the quotation mark. So you say backslash, and that tells JavaScript, okay, hey, whatever I type next, I actually want to be a part of this string, even if JavaScript normally does something else with that character. Okay, so that's called escaping. So you escape the quotation mark, and that tells JavaScript, okay, we're going to put this quotation mark in the string itself. So I'm going to add another quotation mark at the end, and then this last one closes the string. Okay, so these two characters are actually going to only display as one, and it's going to display as the quotation mark. Alright, reload the page, do something. No, it's not working. That's because I don't have my on-click set up. So that was helpful for us to know. We're clicking on do something. We could be coding all this stuff in function and wondering why it's not working, because we started out right away by checking the console.log and then checking it. We know whether or not it's working. This part is wired up to this part. We know that right away. Okay, so on click we want to call say hello. Oops. Hello. We'll go ahead and change this text to say hello. Alright, so that's working. So now we want to grab the input element. So we create a variable. Input element. And in that variable we're going to get the HTML element with document.get element by ID. The ID is input 2. That should be input 1. Not sure why I put input 2 there. So the ID is going to be input 1. Paste that in there. So the input element has a property on it where you can access the contents of whatever somebody has typed in here, okay? And it's the value property. So I can say, I can create a variable and say my input text is going to be, now this is just a variable name that I created. I could have called this anything. I could have called it fufu if I wanted. Alright, so that's important. I'm naming the variables in a way that reminds me what's stored inside them. Okay, but it's important to know that these can be called absolutely anything. And you can really confuse yourself if you have bad naming. Alright, so this is the input text. I'm going to get the input element, which is the HTML element, and call .value to access the contents of what's inside the HTML element, what the user has typed in. So I've got input text, and before we go any further, let's just check and make sure we know where we are. we're actually where we think we are. So let's do input text. It's console.log. Now notice here I don't have quotes around this. It's because this is a variable. So I'm logging the contents of that variable. If I had quotes around it, I'd be logging this text exactly. In fact, let's do that. Let's do both of them so we see. So the first one, this should log the input text, that exact phrase, and then this one, it should log the contents of our variable input text. Alright, reload the page, click say hello. We don't have anything in our input, so we type some stuff. You click say hello, input text. See? So here it just printed nothing because there was nothing in here. I type my name, say hello, input text is Luke. Okay, so we're in good shape. Let's keep going. We want to do something with that input text. So we're going to make some output text. The output text is going to be hello, comma, and then I'm going to add whatever the input text is. And then I'm going to add another string at the end. It's an exclamation point. So this string, this is a variable that's going to hold a string. I'm starting out with this base string of hello, comma. I'm adding to that string whatever is stored in the variable input text. And then I'm adding to that this static string, which is just an exclamation point. Okay. I add my semicolon at the end. It's the end of the JavaScript statement. Okay, so I've got this output text. Let's do a console.log. Output text, and then I like to do it like this, where the first argument in console.log is this string. If you put a comment and then it'll print this and then that. So this string is the first argument to the function, and that's the second argument, and you can keep adding stuff if you want. Okay, so reload the page, say hello. Okay, that's working. Let's see if okay. Let's do something more meaningful, like a name. There, it says hello, Luke. Alright, so now the last thing is we need to get that text here. Alright, so we know how to get this element. We inspect that element. The ID of it is output 1. Okay, so we need to get our output element and set that equal to document.getElement by ID. And our ID is output 1, semicolon. Now we can change the inner text of that element. We can see what's in there now. So output 1 dot inner text, and then we can change it. Output 1 dot inner text is going to be our output text here. Okay, save it, reload, say hello, console, there's nothing there. But see, NA, let's add a little clarification here. So this is the previous output. Alright, so you click, type in a name, say hello, input text, Luke, output text, hello Luke, previous output is NA. If we click it again, previous output is hello Luke. But we do see it changed, right? Okay. Let's try this again. Clean up our console a little bit. Luke. Say hello. You click say hello. Input text is Luke. The output text is going to be hello Luke. Previously the output was NA. So sure enough, if I type foo, it says hello foo. And I had a space in here, and notice it included the space. I mean, you can type anything you want there. Right? This is what makes the web interactive. This, the idea of storing information in a variable and then manipulating it in some way is very, very powerful, and it's kind of core to computer science in general. So the big takeaways of this are the function keyword. It's how you define actions. It's how you define execution code, blocks of execution. So you define a function with the function keyword, you add the name of the function, left and right parentheses, and curly brackets. Alright, and then variables store data. They store bits of information. So you start making a variable with the var command, or var keyword, var, and then the name of the variable, and then equals, and then you set it to something. Okay, and there are rules about what you can and can't name variables and functions. Generally, you can name them. You can start with any upper or lowercase letter or an underscore, but it can't start with a number. But it can have numbers in it. So I can say hello 8. That's fine, but I can't have my function be called 8 say hello. All right. There's some more specific naming guidelines, but that's pretty much the gist of it, and you can look that up on your own if you're interested. Okay, so let's double check this, make sure it's working. Alright, good. So now I'm going to move this to ind state, cs.ind state. Okay, so we have, that's my local machine. Here we have, okay, I need to modify index. Add a list item, an A tag, this directory, lecture 4, and then input output HTML. Close it. And then looks good to me. Let's go back to homepage. Oh, I didn't save it. Control O, Control X, reload. What? Let's have a little bug in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. So this is another example, little tiny character changing dramatically what happened. I totally did not expect an input box here, right? But I added this character, and so it thought, for some reason the browser was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to guess you mean input element, and that's not what I meant. Okay, so and save. There we go. Okay, it's a dead link. Let's go back to my folder and scopy, and I'm going to scopy input output now. Alright. And Luke. There, it changed. Open the DevTools. Alright. So that's going to be very useful for you going forward. You don't have to always use this. You can use the console if you want, if it's easier, but it's kind of nice having it on the HTML, like being able to manipulate all those elements and have it display something meaningful. So, alright, that's all I have for this one. Thanks, guys.